what do you think is likely to happen if a strike of the nature that I described happens?
Well, I think the event to look back on, that could show us what could happen is what happened after the Soleimani strike. And it's not a perfect comparison because it's pretty clear the Iranians telegraphed to us that they were going to do that. We had some back channel communications most likely. And so we knew it was coming. And so our troops on Al Asad Air Base, where I served, and actually interestingly where the vice president served as well too many years ago, were able to get to shelters and to get out of places that were very exposed. And Iran launched a salvo of ballistic missiles at Al Asad Air Base. But even then...
Which is where?
Al Asad Air Base is in western Iraq. It's in Al Anbar province.
It's in right. I knew that.
And one thing to note about that base is that we do a lot of joint training with the Iraqi army. And the Iraqi army is part of the same government that has another security force called the Popular Mobilization Force, which is a group of militias that are loyal to Iran. They were funded, initially supported, and trained by Quds Force, led by Soleimani at the time. And so we are at that base training allies of the people that are likely going to be trying to kill us in this war. So that's important to remember. And that, I think, can lead you to understand
that
how
is still the case?
Absolutely. That's our main mission in Iraq right now, is to support the Iraqi security forces, which includes the Popular Mobilization Forces, which consists of Iran-allied militia groups.
This is so bonkers.
It is the most convoluted mission, I think, on the face of the earth right now.
Is that a mission? That seems like...
a suicide pact.
Kind of. It seems like putting guys in jeopardy for what's the purpose exactly?
We're literally propping up an ally of Iran, and we're subsidizing an ally of Iran. And some will argue, it's like, well, we need these troops in Al Assad, and we need them in, parts of Baghdad still and other parts of the country to check Iran. But a small number of troops is not meaningfully influencing the Iraqi government, and it's not providing a meaningful check on Iranian influence. They're just easy targets that allow us to allow the Iranians to bleed us cheaply.
So without divulging anything, I mean, I know that you won't during the course of those conversations say anything that is privileged or, legally confidential, secret. But as far as you know, they're there today. Those American troops are still in Iraq.
As far as I know, yes.
Still surrounded by Iranian proxies.
Yes. And so I would still have concerns about a strike, a direct military intervention in Iran were those troops not there. But the risks would be substantially lower if we didn't have troops in Iraq and Syria.
Man, can I just say something really cynical? It'd be pretty easy to draw us in to a ground war against, or a full-scale regime change effort against Iran by attacking those troops.
Look,
no matter who you are.
I've said it publicly, prior to being at DOD. In a lot of ways, those troops in Iraq and Syria were a tripwire.
You described our troop presence in Iraq as, quote, a tripwire. Can you flesh out what you mean by that and how it happened?
I would say both Iraq and Syria, and probably more Syria is. And that kind of gets to ultimately why I think some people wanted to keep our troops there, is that if there was a mass casualty incident where an Iranian-aligned militia or some other actor attacked American troops and, God forbid, killed or wounded a significant number of troops, that would have been justification to escalate either against Iran or to get more involved fighting other groups like, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. And so just their mere presence was, again, they weren't effectively deterring Iran or other actors because they're just too small, but their presence in and of itself was a risk that we could be sucked into a major war.
So are you saying that you sincerely believe there are U.S. policymakers who intentionally put American troops at risk?
I don't think consciously there are U.S., at least I don't want to believe.
No.
There are U.S. policymakers that believe that, but, I think subconsciously some folks did.
Lyndon Johnson allowed the USS Liberty to be attacked. He knew those guys were going to die. He thought they were all going to die. I mean, I think that's true. So, I mean, that's happened before. He's the president of the United States hoping for the death of U.S. troops for some other agenda. Like, there are people that evil. Lyndon Johnson was that evil.
Yeah, I mean, the what we know now about Gulf of Tonkin and all that other, I think so.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And my belief is that honestly, a lot of it more had to do, and we talked about this last interview, this kind of policy inertia. Like, It's easier just to say, let's keep doing the status quo, as opposed to actually changing something, because there's less risk in a lot of people's minds. Now, again, I just laid out the risk of keeping troops there, but in some people's minds, there's less risk to their career by preserving the status quo as opposed to changing something that's not working.
And regardless of motive, I think your point is like demonstrably true. Whether or not the people who set it up intended it to be a tripwire, it is a tripwire.
Yes.
That's fair, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So that's the first thing that could happen if we strike, if the U.S. military strikes offensively against Iran in any way, right? So so then what else? What would happen then?
Well, that's where there's really, it all depends on the impact of the counterstrike on U.S. troops and on American facilities and how the United States responds. If we continue, at that point, you're on the escalation ladder. So if our troops are attacked and we counterattack with a larger strike and a larger force, and if we use certain bases in the region, like say in places like Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, if these countries allow us, and there's a good chance, this is something I think needs to be constantly reinforced, is that these Gulf Arab states are not where they were in 2019. So it's not a guarantee that they would allow us to use these bases in their country to attack Iran. But if the Iranians perceive, whether it's true or not, that we are using those bases and they're looking to punish us, they will attack bases that are, larger, maybe more hardened, but hosts a lot more troops. And that could quickly lead to more casualties. They could also attack ships in the Arabian Sea or Persian Gulf. And they could also, if we continue to get pushed up the escalation ladder, attack U.S. diplomatic facilities. Now, those are all worst case scenarios, but they're risks that should be considered and can't be ignored. So it gets back to this whole idea that and again, I hope I'm wrong, I fundamentally don't buy that you can just do one or two strikes and that's it, and the Iranians, aren't going to respond. It's going to have to be, you're going to have to prepare and expect a much longer and much more bloody military campaign.
Obviously, without divulging the details of any kind of classified planning document, we know that the Pentagon has been thinking about how Iran would respond to a strike against its enrichment facilities for like a long time. This has been, people have, and I know that you're one of them. Does anybody think that they just wouldn't respond?
I'm sure there are people right now who are trying to say is they won't respond. It's like they're weak, they're on their back foot, they want to just save the regime, so therefore they're just going to back off, that they're not actually going to respond. And if you look at the hours immediately after the initial Israeli set of airstrikes, there's some people saying, watch, like Iran's not going to really respond, or it's going to be weak. And, over the next few days, they launched between 400 and 500 ballistic missiles. Again, thankfully, they weren't as effective as originally advertised, but still, they've, as we sit here today, I believe killed around 25 Israelis, wounded nearly 600.
If there's one thing we've learned over the past couple of years, it's that when things go south unexpectedly, and they do, you are in charge of your family's health and safety, not the authorities, you. And so prepare, think it through ahead of time. You remember that during the dark days of COVID, for example, you kept hearing about a medicine called ivermectin. Doctors have used ivermectin for decades. It's treating parasites, viruses, even studying it as a potential cancer treatment. But you are not allowed to use it. In fact, you're a bad person if you even use the word. But at Jace, they've thought this through, and they've looked at the evidence. The doctors at Jace have created a powerful anti-parasite formula made with a blend that includes ivermectin. It's the fastest, most affordable option on the market, and getting it actually is simple. Getting that and other life-saving medications is just a matter of going to jace.com. Jace is Jase. You fill out a brief online consultation, and a Jace doctor quickly reviews your information. Within minutes, your medication could be on its way to you, delivered right to your door. That and a lot of other life-saving medications. So don't wait till there's a disaster. Take back control of your family's health and safety. You can get emergency antibiotics as well. Go to jace.com, use the discount code Tucker. Jace.com, discount code Tucker. I mean, it has been reported repeatedly that there's going to be American military intervention. Like, that's just like reported as fact, and whether it is or not. So I just want to focus a little more intently on how does that change the dynamic, and how much offensive intervention would qualify as like dragging America into the war officially. Annie?
Well, again, a lot of it goes back to the conversation we're just having. If Iran doesn't respond to just one or two strikes, they decide to take that blow, and there's evidence that most of the evidence shows they probably wouldn't, then that would probably contain the size of the American offensive operation. But if we were to go in, I think it is likely that we wouldn't just hit a nuclear site for the sake of our own troops. So it would not just be a one-off strike, or we'd coordinate with the Israelis. And again, if there is an attack on American bases in response to this, that would pull the United States more into the war and push us into a spiral where we're constantly escalating against the other side. And then that brings us to a point where, even though it's pretty clear the Trump administration, even if they do decide to do the strike, doesn't want a regime change war, is ultimately get pulled into a regime change war, whether or not we want it.
So none of this was even on the table, 10 days ago, until the Prime Minister of Israel called the President of the United States and said, I'm going and I'm doing it. I don't care what you say. It's all been reported in the New York Times. Give him 3 days notice. It's just a little bit crazy that all of a sudden we're talking about, like, how are we going to deal with this war against Iran, which wasn't even a thing 2 weeks ago. So I just want to say that. How, if this were a war that the United States chose, it wasn't. This is a war that was chosen for us. We were going along with it. But if we had chosen this, if we decided, like Pentagon HQ, we're going to take out those enrichment facilities, how, like, you wouldn't do it 3 days later, right? There's a lot of planning for these things.
Yes. And this is, again, stuff that's been publicly reported, is these types of operations have been planned for years. Yeah. And they've had different plans. They've adjusted, but have essentially been on the shelf for years now. Yeah.
But does it make it harder to get just 3 days notice before the shooting starts?
This is where I'm a little unsure, because I don't know what 100% for sure. There's a lot of public reporting, but that's not always so.
You're absolutely right. And I shouldn't pretend like I know.
And so I don't know what was in the region or not, but to successfully accomplish something like this, you do need there needs to be a lot of things that happen leading up into that. I think that is fair to say. And the United States military can move quickly when it needs to. I will say it can move quickly when you don't have large number of ground troops, when you're primarily relying on air and naval assets. So you can move stuff in quickly, but leading up into that, there normally would be a lot of planning. But again, I'm sorry if I'm going back and forth here. This has been a scenario that has been planned for a long time.
In thinking about this, non-classified, of course, but given that Iran is part of BRICS and has all kinds of military and economic ties with Russia and China, how high is the concern that they might get involved?
So this is where it gets interesting. Is I think Russia in particular has a lot of reasons for them not to get involved.
That's my sense.
And there's a few reasons. Is one, a lot of the things that Iran would need from Russia are actually things the Russians really need in Ukraine.
Right.
So air defense assets, fighter jets, and things like that is Russia's military and industrial base is much more developed than the United States and NATO. Interesting fact. And the NATO Secretary General says all the time, is Russia produces more weapons and munitions in 3 months than all of NATO combined produces in a year. So, but the Russian way of war in Ukraine relies on overwhelming firepower. So it's very difficult for them to divert weapons to other partners. I'm not saying that couldn't happen. Maybe there's some intelligence sharing, but I don't think that my gut would be is they would not support Iran in a very big way. I think China is different. I don't think that they would overtly support the Iranians, but I think if there's one party that over the medium term at least, and they may face some short-term challenges because of disruption and energy surprise, but over the medium term that would benefit from another major war in the Middle East where the United States is heavily involved in, it is China. Because the weapons that we would be using to fight Iran are what we would need in a Pacific contingency, and God forbid we fight a war with China. It's not even fighting war either. It's weapons that we want to supply to some of our partners, whether it's Japan or the Philippines or South Korea or Taiwan. Those are all systems that would be heavily used, whether it's air defense, standoff munitions, other types of air-to-surface munitions, surface-to-surface munitions. Those are the things that are going to lead the Iran fight because of just the size of Iran. Iran is a huge country, both in terms of population, but geography. It's not as small in terms of geography as Iraq, and it's just much longer distances to, say, get from the Persian Gulf up to Tehran, so you have to rely on certain types of weapons and certain types of aircraft. Again, all of which would be at the tip of the spear in a fight against China. So it is in their interest to see us expend more and more munitions and wear down more and more weapon systems in the Persian Gulf. So, again, China's played it very smart in how they engage the Middle East. I think that they would be more willing to do things economically to help Iran and maybe provide some non-lethal systems like they have for Russia that could be beneficial for Iran in this fight.
Do you think there's any chance that China if this does become a direct conflict between the United States and Iran, that China enters it in a way that's like, that we can't ignore, that's just so provocative that we're at war with them too?
I think it's more likely that they would make a decision to do something in the Pacific because that is more important to them. I don't buy this argument that if we were to pull out of the Middle East, that China would want to become a hegemon in the Middle East. They have been able to use smart power and minimal military power to maintain influence and reap economic benefits from the Middle East. And they don't have the force projection capabilities that the United States has. Some smart people that I've worked with have made pretty compelling arguments that they're not likely to try and dominate the Middle East. So I don't think China would get directly involved in the Middle East, but if they see the United States worn down even more in the Middle East, that may change some of their calculus vis-a-vis Taiwan.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.